The way I've been kind of characterizing this environment is that I have a long-term inflationary outlook for this decade, but inflationary
Hmm.
decades can still have disinflationary pullbacks. And so I generally view us as being in a disinflationary period within an inflationary, longer term cycle. Going into this year, I was emphasizing cash, healthcare stocks, energy pipelines, energy producers. That's kind of the outlier compared to a normal recession. I've been more bullish on energy than most. Um, as far as bonds, so it's funny because I've been a structural bond bear for quite a while, especially in real terms. I was expecting high inflation for a couple years now, so I've been avoiding any sort of duration in my portfolio on the bond side. But once we did start to get that, 3%, rate on the 10-year, I actually did put some of my cash into that middle of the curve, so the 7 to 10 year type of bond exposure. So I'm actually fairly bullish on bonds on a risk adjusted basis as, say, a 6 to 12 month trade here compared to how I normally am. And so basically, in responding to market conditions, the bond market was unattractive going into this year, in my view, just because of that inflation component. But once it got deeply oversold, and once we started to see some of the signs of potentially some disinflationary pressures, I've been, moderately bullish on bonds. One thing I'm looking at though is the generally these longer term capex cycles. If you look at kind of every other economic expansion, it kind of bounces back and forth like a ping pong ball between investing in more disinflationary tech type stuff versus investing in more, real world commodity type stuff. And if you use the commodity cycle, for example, basically whatever happens is in an expansion, you eventually overbuild whatever it is that's kind of fueling that whole expansion. And then that's inevitably what gets, partial malinvestment and then partial kind of degorging of some of that excess. And so, in the whole 2000s decade, you had, they overdid it on commodities, housing, banking, right? So that eventually blew up. And during this whole 2010s and then into COVID, I think we overdid it on the tech capex and software, and reliant on perpetually unprofitable companies at super low interest rates. And so some percentage of that is malinvestment. Obviously, not the majority of it. There's a lot of useful products and services that came from that. But I think we spent a decade of that. That's where some of our excess was. And we've seen, for example, early layoffs pretty significantly among the tech sector and kind of the ex-Bitcoin crypto sector, so the broader crypto space. Those types of things I think are where a lot of the weakness is going to be, as well as he pointed out, any sort of very vulnerable indebted companies or anything that's heavily tied to interest rates, that kind of environment. Whereas I think you'll get less weakness in some of the service sector workers, some of the energy sector workers. So I think that it's like many recessions, it kind of ends up being different than the recession before it, kind of in the opposite type of recession. Although, of course, they all share a core weakness of general employment conditions. But again, it largely depends on what policymakers do in this type of environment. The more they try to tighten fiscal monetary policy, the more they could potentially get an increase in unemployment. Whereas if they ease back on some of those, they could potentially keep unemployment on the lower side. So it depends on if they want the system to kind of suffer from fire or ice, inflation or disinflation. Looking at the PMI cycle and its various leading components is an important thing to look at, as well as a shift in Fed policy. But the way that I generally manage a portfolio is more about shifting around the margins rather than like in or out. And so what I mean by that is, for example, when there's evidence of excess in terms of valuations and equity euphoria and high sentiment, and then economic conditions are rolling over, that's when I take some chips off the table. I don't just sell everything and go all to cash and try to time the top, but I pull back on some of my risk. And then if we see a significant decline in a number of asset prices, some more than others, I then start putting some chips back on the table in those things that I think are still long-term attractive, even if I think we might or may not be near a bottom yet. And so, we recently saw kind of a spike in bearish sentiment, so it's natural you're going to get a bear market rally. And rather than try to predict really how far that's going to go, I kind of do that risk on, risk off approach around the margins. But I generally agree that I think that earnings are going to be choppy for a long time, and I think that we're not out of the woods yet in terms of this economic slowdown. I think the Fed is still trying to curtail demand as much as they can. We're seeing a yield curve inversion. We're not seeing accommodative Fed policy, and we don't see the bottom in these various kind of forward-looking indicators. So I would keep an eye out on that before taking on more significant risk.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.